Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Content Patch for the 16th of November 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you around 20 minutes of gaming, news, and comment. Coming up on the show today, Metacritic refuses to remove inaccurate review, Beyonce Knowles sued for $100 million by game company, new Crysis 3 trailer shows off single-player and environments, faulty DLC codes anger Call of Duty Black Ops 2 PlayStation 3 players, and Far Cry 3 wants players to turn into performers. Metacritic has refused to take down the original review and score for the title Natural Selection 2 thanks to an inaccurate GameSpot review. GameSpot was forced to take down their original review and re-review the game after a number of factual inaccuracies which negatively affected the score popped up and caused something of a riot on the internet. The original review was created by a freelancer by the name of Eric Naya, and Kevin Van Ord, the reviews editor for GameSpot, issued an apology and gave the UK-based writer Ashton Reyes the opportunity to write the second review. GameSpot's original score was a 6 out of 10, and the second review provided an 8 out of 10. However, Metacritic refuses to change the score to the new updated value, and the head of Metacritic, Mark Doyle, told Kotaku, "Yes, the critics we track know, and I spoke to the GameSpot team about this week, that we only accept the first review and first score published for a given game." He states that this is a critic protection measure that was put in place after many publications several years ago were pressured to raise the score or depublish reviews to satisfy outside influencers. Now, I think what most of this seems to be skipping past in an effort to argue on the subject of whether or not Metacritic is right to stick to its guns and how much we should be blaming GameSpot, which I might add is a hell of a lot for their original terrible review of this particular game. What keeps getting ignored is the fact that the people that really get screwed over by this are Unknown Worlds, the creators of Natural Selection 2. GameSpot reviews are fairly heavily weighted on Metacritic, and as a direct result, the score has gone down and will remain down. It's going to be very difficult to override that. Not only that, but it is the only mixed review that this game has actually had on Metacritic. Everything else has been in the green area. This one is also sitting in the top 3, so you can very clearly read what's going on here. There is an editor's note, however, the only thing that editor's note actually says is the quotation and the score are from the original GameSpot review, and Metacritic, per long-standing site policy, only accepts a publication's first review and score for a given game. So that's all it says. It doesn't say, hey, the actual review for this is way higher. It just says, this is the first score. And this involves people going to check. If they go and check, then that's great, but if they don't, and they take it at face value, which a lot of people do with Metacritic, sadly, then yes, they may very well be put off the game by a review from a so-called reputable site. Now here's the thing, Metacritic need to make an exception to this policy. I understand why the policy is there, it makes sense, or at least it did make sense back then when this stuff was actually happening. It really isn't happening anymore to the best of my knowledge. I've never heard of that. No, really, I haven't. The only pressure that will ever really be applied is, well, we just might not give you the early copy next time. And I have never seen an instance of a score being taken down and brought back up. People are far too smart for that. If suddenly you put down a review and then you bring up another one with a higher score and you gloss over all of the problems, the first thing people will do is cry foul. They're not dumb. In this case, people immediately cried foul because the review was flagrantly false. It didn't even seem to understand the game. And this is not a big surprise, considering this guy that keeps writing these reviews is actually a bit of an idiot. His review of Super Monday Night Combat was so completely off the mark that Uber Entertainment actually tweeted and says, does anyone have his email address? Because this doesn't even seem to resemble the game that we made. Did he even play it? A good question indeed. I have long said, alongside many other people, that Metacritic has far too much power. It is the cancerous heart of the score culture within games journalism. The score culture must die. It is of no benefit to anyone whatsoever. The very notion that you can quantify a title within some kind of arbitrary numbering system which you yourself as the site or reviewer have created, and there is no standard across the board, is fundamentally damaging. It discourages people from actually reading the reviews. It encourages obsession over tiny numerical increments. The whole notion is absolutely absurd. And not only that, but Metacritic absolutely misrepresents many sites by changing 5 stars into 100%, which completely skews the number and makes it worthless anyway. 5 stars is not the same as 100%. 10 out of 10 is not the same as 100%. Sites that choose to use those values have different ideas as to what they all mean. So this whole aggregation system, plus of course the biased weighting system of each site, does lead to a situation where Metacritic has an unprecedented amount of power over game sales and yet has no business possessing that power. This is just yet another example of inflexibility which is harming a developer directly, and Metacritic flat out refuses to do anything about it, which adds to the pile of evidence that I have that suggests that Metacritic should go the way of the dodo and disappear from the universe. Oh, and stop paying money to Eric Naya or Naya or however you pronounce his name, because he clearly has no idea what he's doing. In a story that could very well be in People magazine as opposed to on video gaming sites, Beyonce Knowles is being sued as a result of backing out from making the game Star Power Beyonce, a game that was supposedly being manufactured by Gate 5 in 2010. The company alleges that serious losses were incurred in the process, and Beyonce Knowles, after losing her appeal, is going to court for $100 million. Not $100, as this article seems to claim. Beyonce claims that she didn't commit to the project because she didn't think it actually had enough funding, whereas the developer says that she understood they were looking to secure additional funding. There is very little to say on the subject of this particular story. I just posted it because I wanted to laugh. Oh ho ho ho, what a shame it is for the games industry that we will not be getting Star Power Beyonce anytime soon. Truly, what a loss to this artistic medium. What can I say? It's a slow news day. That's just how it is. More information has come to light on the subject of Crysis 3 via a fairly lengthy alpha gameplay trailer. It's about 6 minutes long. You can watch the whole thing by clicking the link in the description below this video. A small selection of the gameplay is going to be on the screen right now. What it essentially shows is some fairly nice open field stuff. Crysis 3 is a little bit more verdant, let's just say, than Crysis 2, which is very much based inside a city. There's a lot of overgrowth, there's some rather crazy biodome stuff going on, thankfully minus Pauly Shore. Although, I have to say, if I could shoot Pauly Shore with a bow and arrow, then that may very well be my purchase solidified right there. Also show some tunnel warfare here and there. What I am seeing in this gameplay is a fair degree of freedom, which is what I hope to see. Crysis 2 annoyed a lot of people because the original Crysis seemed to have a huge amount of freedom, very much the Far Cry style of here's an island, approach the objective from whatever way makes sense and deal with it that way. Crysis 2, on the other hand, was, well, this is a more directed experience, but it's still fairly large, wide open areas, and you could approach from a variety of different angles. I did like the single player for Crysis 2, I enjoyed it very much, but the thing about Crysis is that it doesn't really seem to have anything going for it, or at least it didn't, aside from its really impressive graphical fidelity, which of course has gone downhill as a result of the fact that they're now putting it on consoles. Crysis 3 does not actually look any better than Crysis 1. Quite the opposite, in fact. If you mod up Crysis 1, it looks absolutely incredible, which is ridiculous considering that game is now several years old. One way or the other, the trailer is available for you to watch. I'll probably pick this game up, honestly. It's usually a good time. I mean, the Crysis games have always been a fairly fun single-player experience, and thankfully don't fall into most of the trappings that the modern military shooter genre actually has. I'm a little concerned, once again, about the lack of emphasis on suit powers that this gameplay actually shows. We basically get to see Cloak, and that's really about it. What made Crysis 1 a little bit special was the addition of the suit powers. A lot of these have been kind of rolled together, and they did so to make the controls make more sense, but in doing so they also made the whole thing just less interesting in general. I want to see more suit powers, not less. But again, it does avoid most of the MMS trappings. It's fairly decent in terms of being an FPS. It seems to be something of a throwback even to FPSs of yesteryear, and we do need that right now. We really do. If I can open my own doors, choose my own path to actually kill something, and don't have to press F to blow up universe, then I'll be fairly happy with it. If you really want to get your hands on this thing and pre-order, there is a fairly good bonus available. You get the original Crysis if you happen to pre-order this particular game. So that's not too bad at all if you're looking to do that. But once again, unless you really want to get a hold of Crysis, and you definitely loved Crysis 2, then I don't really see a reason to pre-order. It's just too much of a risk these days. Pre-ordering a digital game, in my opinion, is quite frankly a little bit pointless. PlayStation 3 players are having yet more problems with Black Ops 2 after reports of freezing issues. It now appears that some people that have the Nuketown 2025 and Zombies pre-order maps are not actually able to redeem their codes. It's not clear just how widespread this is yet, although it does appear to be confined to the EU, with many posters going to the EU PlayStation forums to complain. Some users contacted customer service and were told that their code had already been redeemed in Germany, which is a little odd to say the least. There is currently no solution to this particular problem other than keep punching in the code over and over again and see how it actually works out. If you have a similar problem, then I would suggest that you get in touch with them via Twitter. That's where their main support is. That would be twitter.com/ATVIassist. That's twitter.com/ATVIassist. There is currently no solution to this, but the Twitter does seem to be fairly well updated and actually responding to the concerns of the community in this particular regard. However, can I just throw one out there? I know it sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? But you know how you could avoid broken DLC codes in boxes? You know how that could happen? Yeah, I can think of a way. You could include the map in the edition to begin with. It's just kind of ridiculous that Nuketown 2025 was considered a pre-order bonus. This was one of the most popular, if dumb, maps in the original Black Ops. Why on earth would you then slice it out and decide to give it as a pre-order bonus? The very notion of the idea is absurd. You already start segregating the player base from day one, which I've spoken out against many, many times, and I'm certainly not the only one. The way that map packs have a tendency to work is they split the community into smaller and smaller and smaller chunks, to the point where the guys who are just playing the original maps have less games to join, ergo they are pressured into buying the DLC. It's a very predatory business model, and it's certainly not good for the game. Maps, I think, really should be released for free under all circumstances, simply as a result of that. If you want to sell weapons, you want to sell extra game modes, then okay, you can consider doing that. But usually, you shouldn't be selling anything that directly splits the community, because it becomes a problem. I'm not sure why anyone is honestly surprised. Activision have been known for this kind of nonsense, and this is just yet another example of money grubbing, encouraging pre-orders via dangling that little carrot, and unfortunately, it turns out that carrot was redeemed in Germany. And finally, a rather lengthy and flowery article available here on Gama Sutra. Certainly worth a read, although it does kind of smack of perhaps unrealistic expectations, but an interesting read nonetheless. It's entirely possible that I'm just too stupid, too much of a heathen to get it. So, the writer behind Far Cry 3 has gone on record as to the subject of acting in video games and wanting to make players feel like the performer, applying principles from method acting in order to get them to relate to the character. His name is Jeffrey Yohalam, and I would recommend just having a look at this because it is kind of intriguing. He made some interesting remarks on what could be construed as scripting within video games, saying that authorship in games is not antithetical to play. In fact, authorship and play can build on each other, and this will forward the medium. So what he's essentially talking about there is that freedom of choice, as opposed to scripted encounters, is not necessarily the way that you immerse people into video games. If you write the character properly, and if you script the game properly, then you can really bring people into it, and you can have people relate to the character. This is an interesting point of view, because yes, it works very well in books and movies and television shows and any other non-interactive medium, but can it really apply to video games? And more to the point, should it be applying to video games? He goes on to describe the research that went into this, and creating the main character as a 25-year-old party animal who essentially has commitment issues is something that supposedly will really key into the demographic, that being 25 to 35-year-old males who really like guns. That definitely seems like a rather simplistic way of looking at it, honestly, and I think that perhaps they may be overestimating just how many people will really get into that. Personally, for me, if I were to play a character like that, I really, really wouldn't like doing so, because I actually can't relate to that at all. An irresponsible 25-year-old with commitment issues. Alright, well, that really isn't the kind of character that I personally want to be playing, and I don't really know if I would want to see that guy succeed. I've really got to have had some injustice happen to my character in order to really push forward and have this guy actually succeed. But if he's a jackass to begin with, then I'm unlikely to sympathize with his agenda. I think there's a difference between an anti-hero and someone that's just plain worthless, and I don't think I really want to be playing a guy that's just plain worthless. Not to mention the fact that this guy has no business running around with an arsenal of guns like Rambo. That's just absurd. There are some other intriguing remarks. He says that in Far Cry 3 we're experimenting with the idea that the player takes a journey to who they really are. We give the player an external objective, but they're also given an unspoken internal objective to become the ultimate warrior, which is naturally what the player wishes to do, and it turns out that that's what Jason really wants to do as well. We're kind of taking a meta direction. This is actually complicating what I just said. Yes, it is. I mean, the whole article complicates what he just says, really, and he kind of dances around the idea that players should be given choice. He does reiterate something that I think we've been talking about for a very long time, the idea that dialogue choices can actually be bad for immersion if the voice actor delivers the line in a way that you didn't intend. This is also one of the reasons why I, quite frankly, rather enjoy silent protagonists. Then I could just put my own voice to it, and that's the kind of internal monologue that's going on in my head as I do this. Whereas if that monologue is going on and then my character says something completely different, then that kind of shatters the whole thing, doesn't it? But I wouldn't agree that that's a reason to stay away from that stuff. No, I feel that that kind of choice, even if it's very simplistic, sometimes even binary, is good to the experience. And honestly, I don't really trust writers for video games all that much, especially not for Far Cry. I mean, Far Cry is not exactly known as a great literary work by any stretch of the imagination, and even Ubisoft's perhaps most well-written game, that being the Assassin's Creed series, is still prone to pretentiousness and delusions of grandeur. I am encouraged, however, by the attitude that seems to be underpinning this entire thing, which is the point of the game is to have a lot of guns and to be the best warrior. Ergo, there's only so far that we can really go with the character development. We understand that's where this character is going, and that's what the players want to be, so that's what we're going to focus on, rather than some life-shattering discovery and other such nonsense. It's definitely an interesting point of view. Whether or not you agree with it is a different matter entirely, but I would go and have a look at it. Link is in the description below this video. Alright folks, that pretty much wraps us up for the week here on Content Patch. Thank you very much. I'll be back at the same time on Monday with yet more gaming news. Those asking about viewer remarks, I'm still trying to figure out how to integrate them into the show. They may even have to be their own separate once-a-week show, but that also comes down to whether or not we have the time to create it. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time.